can't hear.
Oh, I can hear Soukaina too.
Yeah, sorry. Hi. I was muted. Hi, everyone. Hi. Thank you for joining. My name is Soukaina Aboulaoula. I am Sheffield DocFest Arts Program Virtual Exhibition Curator. And today I will be moderating this discussion between Geraldine Snell and Mohamed Abdelkarim. Before we start, I will briefly introduce our guests and artists. And if you happen to have any questions during the discussion, please drop them in the chat box. Geraldine Snell, based in London, uses moving image, performance, music, and the word to navigate being with humor, nuance, and awe. Mohamed Abdelkarim's practice is performance-oriented. He considers performance as a research method and a practice through which he produces texts and images that embody the forms of poetry, scripts, sound, and video. Thank you, Geraldine and Mohamed, for joining me in this discussion titled How to Perform in Between Brackets in a Crisis. Or rather just how to perform a crisis. I think the first question I would like to start with, and which hopefully will help us understand a bit better your practice, is how do you define performance in your work? How do you use performance and performativity as an investigative methodology or tool rather than just a medium? You can decide who wants to start.
Yeah, please, Geraldine. Sure.
Oh, sure. Okay. Thanks. And yeah, thanks to Soukaina and Mohamed for being here with me for this discussion. For me, performance is very much, it's a method and it's a medium for my creative work, but it's also a tool for living and being and testing out different ways to pay attention and be aware and try to be a better, more conscious, more careful, more considerate human. So I think that's quite a roundabout way of saying it's really a tool for just sort of increasing one's attention and focus, I guess. In my work, I guess it specifically takes the form of, I think, specific performance settings and things both in person, online, musical performance. I don't usually work with scripts or anything, but I sometimes use word prompts or scores. But I think I'm really interested in this idea of where the performance actually begins, because sometimes that's quite ambiguous, and I find that space quite exciting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. When performance as an apparatus or as a tool, I can say like I mainly work with what I call like the performance spectrum, which a canon of knowledge, a foundation that depend on what have done in performance studies, and considering performance as a lens to study the world or to see the world. And also from this spectrum, theater and drama component, and the history of drama component, for me is also a research as a research tool when I examine a drama within an event, historical event or an event. So and also drama component as event, characters, time, space. When you examine these components to a certain events, as I said, and when I repeat and when I somehow like within the script, I consider the acts like telling and showing and moving and doing. To clarify more, because my practice is depend on text-based performance, which writing and text is a starting point and is a process, and the script as a space is a space for, I consider it as a space as a research space, as a site where can somehow trace and document the research process. So these acts of writing, telling, showing, moving, doing, as I said, like as an act that I'm doing within a performance, or I'm seeing through these acts certain events or certain case studies. So here, like somehow, like I see like the research process and the production meet. So I produce, but somehow like when I call performance, I produce not merely performance as performance, but also uh, other mediums and other formats that somehow perceive the performativity itself, like radio drama and soundtracks and even written scripts and scores, video that somehow conceive or the gesture of performativity. Yeah, and this how
I think,
somehow yeah.
sorry, I just wanted to pick up on text and how very differently, and actually not so very differently, both of you use it. Geraldine, when you were answering the question, you said that you don't usually work with scripts or scores. And Mohammed, although sometimes you do happen to work with text as a score, you consider it as, I remember from our last discussion, as a cluster. You said you use sentences as spaces to perform in. So I was wondering if maybe both of you can just elaborate on how you use text, as perhaps even a way to document your performances.
Yeah, I think
Maybe.
I mean I do use scores, but not a kind of conventional score. I do have a musical background, somewhat. I play piano and I did a bit of music theory, but certainly, for an example I could give is with my writing and video overlove. So I wrote a book. Well, it didn't start as a book, but it started as a piece of writing formed of letters. Um, that in itself, the act of writing that was a kind of performance of life, and I was almost like elevating a life situation that didn't require that much melodrama to the point of absurdity, um, both as a kind of like literary creative exploration, but also just as something to get me high, something to personally give me like more life, really, and to follow that thread and that inspiration. But an example of how maybe I used that text is when I made the video, for example, I didn't go through each sort of page and kind of storyboard or script it, um, or form some kind of treatment in any kind of traditional way. But I sort of responded to the text with the video, and sometimes the performance. So sometimes I would just do a reading, but there's times that I would maybe there was phrases or things that would become a lyric or they'd become part of a musical loop, and there was also a soundtrack for that. That's how yeah, I see it as like a starting point, really. I mean, thinking about the performance I've just done, I can show you kind of just before I did it, I kind of scribbled this on a page, and it's probably reversed, but this is how crude it can be. It can just be kind of like a few different words that then these become layered, and they kind of become different layers of musical melody. So that's an example visually.
Mohammed, maybe if you can share a little
Yeah.
bit about.
Yeah, when I speak about text and script, for me the script plays different role. As I said, like as a side when I document research process. So sometimes a script, became like hosting the process of research. So as a narrative, as an experience, as a stage that the research itself, as body, or as conversation, as dialogues, as the feelings, as like interactions that through. So I like produced as a prose, or as a poetry. And on the other hand, also the script before the performance, because like I define, I differentiate between the script in the three stages: the script before the performance, and the script within the performance, and the script after performance. So it has these developments. So to start, as like as collecting material, as a space to collect material and research experience, and then it goes more to the script from the background of theater drama or theater play. So where actually the script became like the text itself somehow translate or reflect special movement, or scores, or music, or sound, or mise en scène. So these all theatrical background elements, yani, components somehow. So, and the script after the performance, where I add to the script like different layers. Sometimes it had to do with experience itself, as like, for example, as the experience with audience, with the space. When I change, when I improvise, then I get out of the written script. So all these stage of scripts at the end became a part of the production. That's why I produce also scripts in form of publications, and in form of printed matter scripts. So but like any wrapping up, so like the panoramic idea about the script for me. So that's why the script sometimes goes as a play, as I say, like as a theater play, and sometimes I publish as a prose or as a poetry, and sometimes as a narrative, yani appropriating narrative component somehow. I don't know if it was clear or not, but somehow I flew over this kind of appropriation as a history of theater and drama.
Yeah, it's pretty much clear. Thanks for that. I think while exploring both of your work and practice, one thing that was very obvious in the connection between these two is how both of you create this playground where you operate between fiction and nonfiction in a nonlinear way, and just how you merge between these two, and how you make them as um, official, non-official material stories. For instance, if I can go back to our last discussion, I remember, Mohammed, you said that you were working with fiction as reality we missed, or couldn't understand. So you work with events, real events, made up events, fake stories, and sometimes fables. And Geraldine, you use very real day-to-day life domestic phenomenons and events and intellectual situations. So I was really curious to see how you create the storyline of your performances while merging these two, and about this third space that you create from this connection. Perhaps Geraldine, you can tell us a little bit about this.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about that quote since our last discussion. Fiction as reality we missed, and specifically in my, I guess I can think about my work or my approach as it's almost this sort of playful space in which to perform or enact like an idealized form of relating to the world. So whilst in my kind of day-to-day life, maybe I am like very much sort of in my mind and dominated by general busyness and not paying that much attention to things. What happens when you kind of slow down and peel back the layers and pay attention to something and perform it and elevate it is that you can kind of start to appreciate, the depth, the magic, the kind of, the space and the wonder of what is actually already always here. And for me, I think performance and all of these mediums, they're a sort of way towards that. It's almost like if we can think about art in general as a light that we're kind of shining onto things, and saying, look at that, look at that in more depth, whether it's something significant or cultural, historical, or something personal. It's almost like that lamp of scrutiny or that lamp of illumination. For me, that's what these things provide, and that's kind of what I want to share, or amplify things that we don't see because we are ultimately blinkered, and we forget and we miss things all the time. And these, I guess, these methods are spaces to reveal what's actually already here. So it's almost like you use fiction to access reality, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Right before you can reply and share with us, Mohamed, perhaps Geraldine, if you can just summarize the performance you did on Sheffield DocFest Instagram for the people who weren't there to experience it. Maybe you can just say one line about it.
Yeah, I absolutely. And it is up there to go and watch if anyone wants to go see it. It's on the Instagram feed now, but essentially I kind of just really focused on light for 20 minutes. So I used a candle and a bulb and the light of the sun, like I say now, as well as some repeated sort of instructions and language around light, love, and loving light, to create this space where I and the audience could experience light, in more depth than we usually would.
Thanks. Mohamed, what about yourself? How do you deal with nonfiction and fiction?
Yeah, as you mentioned briefly about my somehow my umbrella research project, fiction as a reality we missed, or sometimes I add to it telling fiction as a reality we missed, considering the act of fictioning. And so the my research in my research, I consider the act of fictioning in the form of telling, to somehow to consider, as you said, also event that hasn't been told, or consider event the witnesses haven't seen, or details our senses missed to perceive, or our senses wasn't capable enough to perceive, like feeling pain, or for example. So, in my to elaborate more in my umbrella project, my previous umbrella project, dramatic episode about locomotion. I was mainly interested in in the notion of locomotion and different currency of locomotion through collection of stories. Some are real stories, some are fiction, and some I call it almost real, almost fiction. So somehow the act of fictioning here, it was considered that uh, to to reveal the agency of what I imagine and what I speculate, to fictioning stories as an act of healing history, or healing the future. So as you mean a future, as speculating future, as speculated future, as stories that we didn't attend it yet, but it's predictable. So the act of healing and through fictioning stories. For example, like I worked with one of the character, Isabel Eberhard. She was a Swiss novelist and traveler at the 1895. She moved from Switzerland to Algiers, and somehow in her stories there was a lack of trace, a lack of hearsays, a lack of orality even. So what we knew about her, very few uh, uh, information that came out from her writing as novel and the prose she wrote. So what I'm doing with as an act of fictioning is to think about filling gaps and imagining through the agency of the trace already that exists. So not about I'm not about telling about her because I don't have also the agency to tell about her, but her as a paradigm, her as a history, as a paradigm to understand different issues, more recent issues. For example, like Isabel, uh, uh, she lived with somehow double character as Isabel and also as Si Mahmoud, a male a man name that she chose for herself. So she wrote about through her experience from the perspective of Si Mahmoud and also from the perspective of Isabel. So there was already like this kind of moving from body to alter ego or from name to another name. It's already an act of fictioning. Sometimes we fictioning our characters, we fictioning our body to for a desire or to function. So, and as she was telling in her novels, that sometimes she dressed like a man, not from a desire, but to somehow to intervene in a male in a community that like in a masculine community, in a male community, in a man community in North Africa. So from these stories, I somehow like I trace characters that they use the agency of fictioning, and to retell about her, I use also the agency of fictioning. So in these like process of stories already had gestures of fictioning, and the stories that I retell with the agency of fictioning. So here somehow in this process, in some moment, uh, what we call it reality and what I call it fiction merged, merged with one narrative, with one story. I I consider this story as a reality for the other, as a reality that we missed to perceive, we missed to attend somehow. So as a reality, as a fiction that resists sort of reality, other realities.
Yeah, really interesting. Thank you, Mohammed.
Thank you.
I think maybe one thing that we could also discuss is, and then you can correct me if I'm wrong, but when I was thinking this talk, I tried to consider different elements. That of course the fact that we live. I don't know in the pandemic, and I don't know if it's too soon to put it in the past. We went through this crisis, and I was wondering how performance, which is basically based on physicality and touch and presence, lived through this crisis. How did it shift? And I started thinking about the other aspects of a performance in a pandemic, which is maybe considering this pandemic as material, as score, as instructions for the performance. And it's actually this little idea fits perfectly with both of your practices, because inviting you to this talk was in the hopes of suggesting to our audiences that both of you during the past year were performing this crisis with it, through it, and during a performance also. So I am wondering if we can perhaps get a little idea on how your practice has shifted. Perhaps this time has brought new questions on how to engage with audiences, or how to document the performance or the aftermath of the performance. Or maybe it was a beneficial period because you basically had plenty of personal stories and crazy dramas to work with. So maybe Geraldine or Mohamed, whichever feels ready to start.
I think the pandemic, for me, I think it's not like I changed the work I was making radically, but there's something about being at home a whole lot more, and suddenly you're only like your theatre isn't, a real theatre. It is this rectangle that we're all in on our phones, on our screens, on Zoom, like this, the edges of this. So we're kind of performing ourselves within this space, like, in all our video calls and our work calls, all that stuff, in a way that we wouldn't usually consider compositionally, unless you're somebody who worked remotely a lot anyway. For me, certainly, and I'm a lecturer as well, so delivering lots of um, teaching through this medium, certainly given me a lot of food for thought about that. But in terms of the home space, I feel like having to, your material becoming limited in even more to the kind of everyday environment, it's really made me hone in on that more. And I was doing things like filming the light shining in through the window before. I feel like that's such a metaphor for the pandemic, that like filming the light shining through the window. But that suddenly became like all you could do almost. Or obviously there was loads more creative ways around it, and people have done all kinds of different things, which has been yeah, vital and exciting throughout. But I feel that in terms of maybe having that space to, it's almost a space to sort of question and reflect and not do all the things that one would usually do without questioning, and to actually just try scale it down a little bit. I feel like that's maybe what's had a bit of an impact on my work. And I certainly, I had to finish my master's last year in the pandemic, so I was one of the sort of sad grads who didn't get the physical show, but really kind of went to town with the online side of things. And I think I already used platforms like Instagram and YouTube somewhat anyway, so that was an opportunity to push that side of things a little bit further. As we were talking about just before we came into the talk, I think there's something strange about performance online, and in that you can't actually really sense the audience in the same way. And it seems like an obvious thing to say, but that's been one of the issues for me, like how to gauge audience, or how to actually it's something I kind of always think about, or I'm always wanting to speak to the audience in some way directly through my film work, or even through writing, about to the reader directly. But definitely you don't get the same kind of feedback. So I guess it's thinking about ways around that.
What about you, Mohammed?
Yeah, I'm sharing a lot with what Geraldine have said already. Adding to it, like for sure, like there's a lot of component and elements that we can talk about, like when you perform in physical space and online, like the physical experience, a spatial experience, and the whole experience that has to do with body and space and body to body, even like the body performer to the body of audience. They are there in physical performances. And the lack of all of these elements within online performance. But also I would like to assert more about also, as I said, like part of my production, it has to do with not mainly performance but performative, as a performative medium, like producing audio tracks, or producing the script itself as a print matter, or as a text that you can read it, or you can have access to online. So what pandemic made is to accelerate for me the use and the urgency of the use of these somehow sort of productions, that it was already there before the pandemic but somehow accelerated within the pandemic. So but what also I did really, like somehow like figuring out and discovering, exploring within the pandemic is, as somehow also Geraldine said, like the this screen, like when you perform online as a stage. So how we can somehow use it and think about it as a stage, as really stage that has spatial and deeps, and it has also different statics than the physical stage, but still it has its own static and it has its own power. Like this power of streaming, this power of lighting, this power of like I don't know, like all these tech powers that exist. So like it's a quite general what I'm saying, but somehow like uh, the difference is before the pandemic, all some of these elements we used to deal or used to have a relation that took for granted. Like we're not thinking about more, like about web and like this TV cam screen as a stage. But now somehow this kind of curiosity and this kind of like I said, like exploring it as part of other mediums and other formats that performance go through. Uh, and what I predict also is somehow it's maybe post pandemic. I don't know, like so there's this post pandemic, post COVID. We were, I guess, we some of these stuff that will remain because we somehow explored already, and there's some of endeavors and some of effort that already have made and have done to think about it. So we will not going to shut everything off and like just go physical space, but we are going to we still keeping it, but thinking more about it in time of no like when this medium became not a need but became as a medium, like use it whenever you want and don't use it if you don't feel like it's relevant. So from my experience, like personally, I can wrap up and say like uh, pandemic accelerate the use of audio tracks. So events that I'm already curating as a performance event called Live Praxis, the last edition that already have done during the pandemic, and done as audio tracks, and as like different kind of audio tracks, performance live and recorded audio tracks, from narration to poetry to spoken words to even singing live performance, etc. So we discussed all of these, the possibility of audio as a live, as when it exists as live, track as live performance through only track without any visual, and also as a recorded. So we had these endeavors to explore and think. So my own work also distributed and like produced as tracks and as sometimes, yeah, for sure, live performance, but also as printed scripts and as printed matter of written performance or written to be spoken performance.
I love that you did some prediction over there, because I feel like maybe we can enter in a little speculative prediction phase where together we can talk about the aftermath of performance, for instance, especially in the online spaces. For instance, these series you're curating, Mohamed Live Practice and Geraldine, your online performances, how what's the becoming of these material? Would they, for instance, turn into instructions for people to interpret and do on their own, or is it just gonna get lost somewhere in the digital sphere? Or perhaps you think of ways of documenting it, and here again we return to the question about text as documentation for performance rather than script and instruction. Maybe Geraldine, since you just had an online performance, it's still fresh. You can tell us about it.
I think this question of documentation and what happens to documentation and what is the value of it, particularly when it comes to performance, is really interesting. It's something I think about a lot, because ultimately there is the need to, like put something in a form that one can return to, or that you can kind of offer up to somebody else, or that lasts beyond the kind of moment. But sometimes I think about like the moment of expression as, the original performance, and then when we're kind of making something live, then the liveness is over immediately, and then what happens with the material afterwards, and what is the interest in that? I feel it's a strange one, because sometimes I feel like it's so contradictory to be, or so paradoxical to be kind of almost positing that in order to be present and be live, there needs to be a kind of performance or documentation happening. But then you're not present or live, because like you're picking up the pen, or you're picking up the camera to film something, or you're having to record it, and as soon as you record it, it's as soon as you write something down, it's fiction. That's a quote from Chris Kraus. So we're going back to the fiction question again. But as soon as you film something, it's like it's already passed. So I guess it's not something I have the answer to, or would ever think that there is an answer to, but I see almost, if the act of performing and documenting it is a kind of, it's like a method of being present and paying attention, but then the documentation is, and the kind of the rumination on the documentation of that is going back into past, but it's also proposing a more attentive way of being in the future. But then obviously, and everyone encounters it at different points as well. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at right now. But I do think a lot as well about, what's the role of artistic content in the image sphere, in the media sphere at the moment, and what distinguishes it from general content creation, influencer videos, vlogs, advertising, mass media, mass culture, as well as like, and every kind of teenager on TikTok who is maybe taking a word and they're making a song out of it and making a dance, and then that's this like, infinite all I think is like, well, humanity is just this like ever increasing complexity, and all of this media stuff is just going to proliferate and proliferate and proliferate. But yeah, I wonder what Mohamed thinks, because I think there's it's a real kind of like a sort of, what's the word, a respect or a reverence for making something actually in back into a concrete like written form or something, or like you said, to actually present something back as not just something like, I don't know, throwaway digital culture that's going to get lost, but something established and solid, archived almost.
Mohammed, maybe are you with us?
Yeah. I'm just thinking about. I'm trying to digest what Geraldine said already, which is very interesting. And I don't know, like I don't have a lot to say after Geraldine, covered most of the point. And but talking about uh, what kind of elements are going to remain after these online streaming performances, etc. But the question already does I somehow it even exist for pandemic, because it's a general question that regarding performance as an ephemeral medium, that somehow through the performance art history, this dilemma of does we keep it ephemeral and somehow work more with its ephemerality, or think about how we document performance and document it as video and photography, which is has to do with art history. And I was usually wondering, for me, like as someone uh, working with performance and somehow like value sometimes its ephemerality. So for example, so I was usually questioning when I go to performance museums or see performance in museums from 60s, 70s, and I see photographs, images, and videos. So, so I have these general and basic questions that do I'm watching a performance or video, or now I'm watching a photo, so an image. So I perceive it as an image, or I perceive it as performance, or as a documentation of performance, or so these questions that regarding the performance and documentation, uh, it has been there usually, somehow, regarding for your position, also, regarding your position toward the ephemerality. So, so that's why, so for the online, performance, this question already uh, asked for me, like, for example, like what the difference between when I record performance and stream it now, just like online, and the audience, my body is not there already. So what the difference between it and between when I do it live online, so and these, like details of questions that already, when you do it live, it's not live because it's somehow transmitting, and there's a delay. So it's recorded. Uh, so this question regarding technology and the ephemerality of performance and documenting. So that's why, regard, like somehow I deal with this question of ephemerality and documentation, with my my mediums, that which is script, written, as I said, and the audio tracks that still somehow I feel like to be recorded and to listen, as a spectator, to listen, you still have the experience different than to see or to watch a visual of performance that has a space already, that it used to be embodied by audience and other spectators. So I was somehow still, developing this kind of what's the difference between when you script at documentation or something going beyond documentation. Would you tracks of performance when you, as a spectator, you perceive it with listening practice, with listening senses, and the video documentation, which is already made to be documented or made to be any documentation, so it goes more with video performance. So at the end of the day, depending for the performer position and regarding these elements, regarding ephemerality or body or spatial space, etc. So, but I add, as I same as what I said with the previous question, is like what we learned from during the pandemic is also to rethink about these elements, to rethink about these elements, like regarding online, regarding the streaming and technology things. So what was ephemeral, like we knew somehow what is ephemeral in stage and this art space as performance, but we still somehow exploring what is ephemeral online, so these are the questions that I, like I'm still thinking, and I brought up, and now to think about it also about what is ephemeral here in online somehow.
In the spirit of asking questions and questions, I see that we have two questions. But I was wondering if maybe before, what do you prefer, Mohammed? If we respond to the questions before, your reading of Let the Sea Eat Me to perform a fairy, or would you rather do the reading after?
Uh, yeah, I prefer the question first, and then I do the reading.
Super. So the first question is for Geraldine. Light seems to be a core element in Geraldine's work. Can you tell us more about the role light plays in your work? Is it optical, poetical, or both?
It's I think it's both and more. One of the reasons, so for me, and I guess probably for a lot of people, I mean, light is just everywhere all the time. And light's one of the most immediate things that I guess extract joy from, or I come into my senses or into my body in the present moment. Light, it's like light activates me, so I can't really move around day to day without, if there's this happening, like this happening behind me, or it's just so fundamental and so like I was really light sensitive or photosensitive as a child, and my mum said I used to squint a lot, and I have had vision problems, and I've got very very short sighted. So I think there's maybe actually a sort of maybe medical reason as well that I'm extra like fixated upon light. But it seems to it also seems very symbolic, or it seems to represent a lot for me, which is um, I do really think of light as like, yes, it's of nature, it's of now, it's different every time. It it sort of it illuminates, and I know this sounds obvious, but it's like it's almost so obvious and so mundane and so present and so holy and beautiful and sublime that it's kind of forgotten about somehow. Um, so yeah, I'm interested in light for all of those reasons, and especially I guess visually and as a film, like I don't know, through film, um, we wouldn't have we wouldn't have we wouldn't have it without light, if that makes sense. So yeah, it's absolutely key to me, but
Definitely.
mostly for its ability to just bring us, into its aura.
And then the second question, which is for Geraldine, Mohammed, and perhaps even the audience, for all of us to think about. it seems as if the pandemic is crisis that has swallowed up all other crises. All areas of life could take it as a major cause of change. Is there something like a timeless crisis of the performance artist, which could prevail with or without COVID? Maybe put more simply, what has the global crisis done to the individual crises that you may or may not have experienced? Maybe Mohammed, you can share your thoughts. So it's such an interesting question, quite intense also.
Yeah. Yeah, I will take it. Like my take in this question regarding, like what I like is timeless crisis, and it has to do, with time and also with geography and with space. So, for example, like when I think about like the crisis as COVID-19, as the art scene and our institutions and the policies of working and the policies of health. What we somehow figured out, and it was very obvious that even with this kind of natural disaster as COVID-19, it was everywhere, but there was still, like different from place to another, from what we define the crisis, it was different, like it was different from a place that has, like a different regulation of health system, and a different place that has that has a good, like perfect health system, but through a surveillance and tracking of citizen. So what somehow also we learned from pandemic about, like not about priorities, but it's about more about this, like how these differences between, like states and pandemic, and how we, like, and the policies of health, and the infrastructure within art and out of art, like any within the art world and out of the art world. And so it was very specific, and it has a specificity, like regarding its geography and its context. So I don't know, like how, like to respond to to this specific question, but as usually I see, like somehow it has to do with sustainability, like like not sustainability with a crisis, but like how to live with a crisis. If we assume this timeless crisis is permanent, which, like I wrote about it in my last text here, it's about the crisis is a permanent. So we have to somehow to think about live with it, how we can live parallel to it, like, or under common to it. So I don't have a solid answer to it, more than, like that the response is, like, let's think about how to live within a crisis, not about only COVID-19, but all these crises that already it's there, it's permanent, and we try to live with it.
Well, hopefully this is fiction and this crisis is not permanent. What do you think, Geraldine?
Yeah, I think just in addition to what Mohammed has said, I think about the geographical, the way that it's kind of united previously disparate, or very subjectively experienced crises. I feel like, obviously, I think it's still hard to tell whether how can anyone really know if we've had the same experience of the crisis, because I'm sure it's been different for everybody. It is completely different for health professionals or people who have had direct sort of family members suffer with COVID and that kind of thing. So I think we shouldn't generalize about what the crisis means, because it'll be different for everybody. But at the same time, in a very kind of atomized world, and with such a kind of chaotic media news cycle and sense of all these different crises all the time, and especially the kind of biggest elephant in the room, which is like the ecological or are the ecological crises that also underpin everything else and are examples of other inequalities and flaws in like the human blinkered sort of progress vision, as well as all these other things. There's something about the COVID crisis which has it's made it seem that we are all experiencing the same thing, or you have that sense of I think globally a greater sense of like, okay, that there has been an actual standstill for much of the world that there wasn't before, and there's something about that which kind of undoes the sense of time or business as usual and gives this sort of this pause or this existential question of like what were we doing, what are we doing, and at least I hope it does. But yeah, that's my 2 cents.
Thank you for sharing your thoughts with us. Before you do your reading, Mohammed, I'm just gonna very briefly present your book. I'm just gonna read the description on your website. So for anyone who's curious, you can go to your website and take a look. So Let the Sea Eat Me to Perform a Fairy is a book that holds 8 performance scripts and other material to be spoken. It is inspired by the figure of the renegade who leaves land behind and heads to the sea or leaves civilization to take refuge in the vast desert. It's about performing 8 scripts, and I think you will be sharing a little fragment with us today. So this stage is all yours.
For all the renegades, for all the bodies that got to another land or created their own land or lusted in the sea or over the sea, for all the bodies that have floated or drowned or crossed or still haven't, for all the bodies that are aware of the crisis, the permanent crisis. Did you hear about the permanent crisis or almost permanent? I heard, which made me believe that all people believe the crisis is permanent. All people believe it's not unworthy anymore to resist. All people believe it's unworthy to resist any longer. People are not capable of facing this truth. The truth that people gave up on resisting. Not all of them, but the majority have given up. All the efforts we made, all the efforts you made, all the attempt to reform such a crisis, a few people decided to renegade. A few people decided to renegade, to flee, to dislocate, to cross the sea, to build a new memory. To build a new memory is to replace your memory with a new one, to get into a new place. You can't anymore face the question, who are you? You would rather get out of a place, to cross the sea, to cross the sea, to swim, to walk, to think of a new city, not destiny. Yes, it's about cities, not destinies. To migrate is more about moving, to move between cities or towards city. To move to one city that will push you to another city. To migrate To migrate is to run like birds in the winter. Birds in the winter, this is not a poetic metaphor. That's what migration is in English dictionaries. To migrate, you have to be aware of geography as a walker in mountains and deserts, as a sea rover or as a sea cruiser. I invite you to think about the notion of the fugitive. The notion of the fugitive as a renegade. To renegade is to escape rather than resist. As an anti-resistance action, escaping, the value of escaping, instead of the value of resisting. I apologize. I apologize. I feel jealous of the fugitives. I never dared to escape. Although I'm looking for a new land and a new man, but I have never attempted to escape. Although I'm aware that Christopher Columbus is a colonizer, I still wish I could be one of his crew members, or one of the Jews going to the promised land, to the new land, to go to a place where you have no memory, to go to a place you have no relation to replace your memory with a new one. I have never had. I have never had the courage to escape. I have never had. I have never dared to let the sea eat me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mohamed. Thank you. Thank you, Mohamed, and thank you, Geraldine, and everyone who've been with us and shared this space with us. Have a lovely evening, and let's stay in touch.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you both.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.